and just talk to you, have a chat with you about that. All right, so there's quite a lot of learning objectives. Need a ball? Huh? Need a ball to put your feet up?
No, I'm fine. I'm good.
Sure?
Yeah.
Some of them are similar to things we talked about in the previous chapter, in the nutrition chapter. And then when we come back and we look at different environments that we exercise in, then this information comes back and is important again. So we've got plenty of chance to practice the idea of fluids and electrolytes. So when we did the nutrition chapter, I said that we had our carbs, our proteins, fats, minerals, vitamins, and that water is considered the sixth nutrient, even though it doesn't really have nutrients per se, it's got no calories, all right? But it maintains blood volume, it serves as a solvent for proteins and carbs and amino acids. It helps with the cooling mechanism because it forms the major portion of our sweating, and it helps to carry heat from the inside to the skin so that we can lose heat, amongst many other jobs that it has to do. All right, so it really is crucial. 9 to 12% body weight loss in fluid can lead to death. So it's not very much wiggle room. 9% of your body weight is not very much when we're looking at, that being lethal. Okay, so we can only survive a few days without it. We can do for quite a long time without proteins, carbs, and fats. We might not feel very well, but we can survive. But you cannot survive without water. So it's the most important thing. If you get stuck anywhere, if you get injured while you're out hiking, you've got to make sure that you have water with you. So about 60% of your total body weight is made up by water. And when we look at that more closely, if we look at muscle tissue, then about 75% of muscle is water, and only about 25% of fat cells are water. So that creates a little bit of an issue when we look at bioimpedance as a measurement of body fat percentage. It means that you have to be fully hydrated for that bioimpedance to be giving you a true picture. Okay? Women, because they're smaller, they have less muscle mass, have a lower amount of water weight. Also people who are very overweight or obese, because they have a high amount of fat weight, and fat doesn't have much water, so their water overall percentage tends to be lower. And also the elderly, again, because they tend to have less muscle mass, and so their water percentage tends to be a bit lower, right? It's vital to physical performance, so we'll see, what day is today? Wednesday. Friday, we'll look, it's only about 2% of your body mass decrease impacts aerobic performance. So if you're an aerobic athlete, you really don't have much wiggle room at all with regards to staying hydrated and performance levels. All right, slightly different if you're an anaerobic, but not much. Okay. If you wake up in the morning, as is easy to do in this environment because we're so dry here, and your eyes feel scratchy, that's an indication that you're dehydrated. It means that the fluid level within the eyeball is down a little bit, and so you're feeling that scratchiness. So similar to our idea of energy balance that we did way, way, way back at the beginning of the semester, we also have a water balance that we've got to pay attention to. So on one side, if we were drawing it again as a seesaw, on one side of the seesaw we would have water coming in to the body. So that's going to come in via liquids that we drink, but also via certain foods that we eat. Even pizza is about 40% water. So, you know, and some foods are significantly higher in water. Oh, yay! Right? We also, again, if we go back to the beginning of the semester, when we dump our hydrogen into the electron transport chain and it creates loads of ATP for us and gets spewed out at the bottom, what do we create from the hydrogen? Water, right? Because we need that oxygen there to pick up the hydrogen so that we don't present with an acidic environment. Okay? So we also make water within our cells. On average, a body loses somewhere around 2.5 liters of water a day. All right? Obviously, depending upon who we are, there's lots of variables that impact that. How much physical activity I'm performing, what's the temperature of the environment I'm working out in, what are the levels of humidity that I'm working out in, okay? So when we're talking about trying to match our intake and our loss, box 10.1 suggests that possibly what we need to do, or one of the ways of trying to achieve a balance, is looking at my daily energy expenditure and making sure that I've got enough water to balance that energy expenditure. So some technical terms, euhydration, anything with EU at the front means typical, normal. So euhydration is I'm within safe, normal limits. And hypohydration means that overall I have a net water loss. So hypo is always down, hyper is always up, right? So if I have a net water loss, I'm heading towards being dehydrated, all right? So it's difficult to establish a daily amount. Like we hear things about, you know, you should carry around a gallon of water and drink a gallon of water, or you should drink 8 glasses of water a day, kind of these generalized recommendations. But again, like with our nutrition, it's highly individual. So really what I need to do is pay attention to how I feel and what my performance is like, all right? So, our balance, our intake and our output of water, all right? So our loss, our water loss, is a large amount via our urine. Our urine is responsible for eliminating metabolic and other waste products. So that can be quite a wide range on different days. My sweat rate, the amount of water I lose when I'm sweating, particularly if I'm exercising, I'm going to lose more sweat. A little bit through the feces, and then some through what we call insensible perspiration, which is from your respiratory tract and the inside of your mouth. All right, so when you breathe out, you lose moisture. You know, if you put a mirror in front of your face or you breathe out on a cold day, you see a mist, right? So anywhere from 1,400 to 2,800 milliliters per day, all right? Coming in, we've got our liquids, we have different foods, and we have a little bit from this metabolic water from aerobic metabolism, where we're creating water at the end of the electron transport chain. All right? So what we want is to make sure that we can balance these two out. If my intake is higher than my loss, then urine output will increase. All right? If my intake is less than my loss, then we're looking at becoming dehydrated. Depending how long and how bad that is, there could be health concerns related with that, decrease in performance, and eventually death. All right? So one of the ways that we can individualize how much water we need when we're training, for example, is, and this is the only time you're going to hear me say this, is to use a scale. All right? It will be the only time I recommend using a scale, because they're evil. All right? So what you have to do is to weigh yourself nude before your training session. Do your training session, and then weigh yourself again at the end of the training session. If you lost weight during the training session, did you really lose weight? No, we lost water mass, right? So that means that during your training session, you didn't drink enough to maintain performance and hydration, because you shouldn't lose weight at the end of a training session, okay? So that's a very easy way for you to start to monitor, am I drinking enough while I'm training? How much does what I have to drink change when I go for a run in the winter when it's cold and I go for a run in the summer when it's hot? Because it's not the same, right? You can't just say drink 8 glasses of water every day for 365 days of the year. It's different every day, right? So we want to start to learn, as we mentioned with the food and the heart rate, can I self-monitor? Can I teach my athletes or my PE students to self-monitor? Because if I'm watching out for myself, I'm more likely to develop healthy habits than if someone is telling me to do it all the time, right? So, so we mentioned in the nutrition chapter about electrolyte drinks, electrolyte and carb drinks. But so now we're going to take a little look at this idea of electrolytes and why they're so important in normal function, healthy functioning. All right. So an electrolyte is a mineral salt that can dissolve in water. All right. And so electrolytes are one of the factors that help us maintain normal hydration, euhydration. So for example, sodium chloride is a mineral salt that is an electrolyte because when I add it to water, it separates into sodium, which is positive charged ion, and chloride, which is a negative charged ion. Okay? And the reason they're important is because of the job they do in helping the body to manipulate where the water is sitting in the body. Water isn't distributed equally throughout all our cells. And it doesn't carry a charge very well because it doesn't have typically any charge, right? It's got no charge of its own unless these electrolytes are dissolved within it. Okay? So the electrolytes allow an electrical charge, for example, a motor impulse from the motor cortex to the muscles to be transmitted. All right? So they're essential when we look at excitable tissues like heart muscle or skeletal muscle or nervous tissue. Right? When a membrane is selectively permeable, then we saw that those sodium-potassium pumps, remember those when we were doing the transmission of an action potential? We said the sodium potassium pumps move the ions backwards and forwards across the membrane, right? That helps with maintaining water in the correct place at the same time. And electrolytes also produce osmotic pressure, which is a force within the cell that allows water to move or be held back within a certain cell. Right? So, when we look at this idea of a membrane being permeable to water and osmotic pressure, so if the membrane is permeable to water, then obviously water can move backwards and forwards willy-nilly, but it tends to move to the side of the membrane where it's needed to balance out the concentration of substrate. Okay? So, in diagram A, we have equal parts substrate on either side of the membrane. All right? In part B, we've added extra electrolyte on one side. Okay, so now we've got a lot more substrate here than we have here. And so what will happen is that the water will move to balance out the concentration. Okay, so in my pea brain, because we spent so much time going, things move from high to low and fluids move from high, right? Then I have to apply it everywhere, otherwise I get confused. Okay? So, in my pea brain, if I've got lots of solute here, that means I have less water. And if I've got less solute, I have more water. And so the water moves to balance out the solute. They don't say that in the book. That's just how my little asinine brain works. Right? If I spent all that time learning a concept, I want to keep using it so I don't have to keep relearning things. Okay? So here you can see that we've lost water on this side in this cell, and it's moved across to balance out concentration. Right? So indirectly then, the cells can control the movement of water by getting more or less electrolyte. So opening the channel and allowing more or less electrolyte into the cell. Balance idea again. We want an electrolyte balance, means that we've got a relatively constant concentration of electrolytes available within and among the cells to maintain functioning within a healthy range. Okay? So electrolytes are primarily controlled via the kidneys and the gastrointestinal tract. The kidneys respond to aldosterone. So on the top of the kidneys you have the adrenal glands. If the adrenal glands recognize that my body is low in sodium, for example, then they will release aldosterone, and aldosterone stimulates the kidneys to hang on to some more sodium. Right? So that way we have conservation of sodium possible, and while we're conserving the sodium, they excrete more potassium. Okay? Now, in the GI tract, particularly in the small intestine, because the electrolytes are able to be dissolved, right, then we have minerals and electrolytes within the small intestine, and the minerals can be absorbed. Particularly, what we see happen is if your body is low in a certain mineral, then more of that mineral will be absorbed from the food that you eat, if it's available. Right? When we exercise then, not only are we losing water, but we also lose electrolytes within that water. And so that increases the amount of work the kidneys have to do, and the small intestine. And eventually, if I keep pushing and I don't replenish, then at some point they'll get to a point where they're unable to maintain the balance, and the equilibrium will be upset, and then we'll see dysfunction and a drop in performance. Right? So, depending upon your diet, depending upon the weather, depending upon your size, all kinds of variables play a role. We may need electrolyte supplements like the drinks that we were talking about in the previous chapter, right? Or some people will take a salt tablet, for example, right? I wouldn't take a salt tablet. Well, I would, because I would eat salt out of the. But you know, in the West, you've really got, you know, I'm a little bit weird. What can I say? In the West, we have so much salt in our diet that typically we don't need a sodium supplement, right? Unless you're someone who has been told because they have high blood pressure that they should cut back on their salt. Or some people don't like the taste of salt. Can't imagine it myself. But, you know, so they don't cook with salt. But if you eat pre-packaged products, they are full of sodium, right? So in our culture, with the kinds of cooking and food that we eat, you've really got to be like in the summer here when it's 105 degrees and you're still trying to exercise outside because you don't want to be inside. Or something, you know, it's got to be really hot or really humid, which isn't going to happen here, right? So sweat is what we call hypotonic. If you remember back to when we were thinking about the drinks, whether they were hyper or hypotonic, means that it has a lower osmotic pressure than the blood does, has less electrolytes than blood, but still, if I'm losing 4 liters of sweat in an hour of exercise, that's still a significant amount of electrolytes that I've lost during that time, right? And as I say, if it's hot, but particularly, as we'll see when we do the environmental chapter, if it's humid. So, some of the adaptations that we see with regards to electrolytes when I'm acclimatized to the heat, then I might sweat more, right? Because that sweating is a cooling mechanism. However, the sweat will have lower levels of electrolyte in it. So I'm sweating more, but I'm not losing as much electrolyte as I was before the adaptation. We also might start sweating sooner, okay? Particularly for the men, because girls tend to start sweating before guys do. We're a little more efficient than the men. All right? So when it gets hot this summer, you can test it out. All right? When it first starts getting hot and you're exercising, you can have a lick of your hand and see how salty it is. And then give yourself a couple of weeks of exercising in the heat and try it again. And it should be less salty than it was the first time. Okay?
Can you see?
Yes, because I'll have some tea.
I have a question.
Mm-hmm.
Is it beneficial, like, if you're gonna go out and, like, exercise a lot and lose a lot of electrolytes? Is it beneficial for you to take a bunch of electrolytes, like supplements, before you do that? Before you work out, like, how would you go to not really taking
If you're going to go out and it's really hot or it's really humid and you're going to go for an hour, hour and a half, then it might be beneficial to take some electrolyte drink ahead of time. It's more important that you are fully hydrated before you go out in those circumstances. But it might. If you've got a powder drink that you can mix up so that you're getting some water and some electrolytes ahead of time. But the kidneys and the small intestine are pretty good at managing your electrolyte balance unless you really, really stress it. So as I say, you know, if you do jacket potatoes or boiled potatoes, or when you do your vegetables, if you always put salt in the water with your vegetables, or if you're a potato chip freak or a French fries freak, then you're getting plenty of salt, right? Are we okay? So when we're testing urine, then the electrolyte content varies over time. If we look at it during exercise, the harder the workload, the higher the intensity, the less sodium gets excreted. The kidneys kick in and start to hang on to that sodium, right? So when you're working out at your hardest, your sodium excretion via urine is somewhere between 10 to 20% less than it was when you're just sitting in the classroom, right? Unless you're working out in a controlled environment where there's air conditioning and it isn't boiling hot, and then you might not see such a decrease. So the decrease occurs because we excrete less, so the aldosterone stimulates the kidneys to hold on to the sodium. But another interesting factor is what occurs with urine output. So when you first start to exercise, urine output increases ever so slightly. Probably don't even notice it. But when you are working out at a moderate to high intensity level or for a long period of time, then urine output decreases, right? Can anybody remember why urine output decreases when we're working out hard? Stressing the brain.
Because water is being used in other tissues and stuff?
Partly.
Oh, it's because your parasympathetic
redirects blood flow away from your stomach and your kidneys and towards the working muscle. So without the same level of blood flow to the kidneys, they decrease output. Okay, last bit, and then I'm going to chat. So we have a built-in kind of safety mechanism to try to keep us hydrated, okay? The problem is that humans aren't very good at hydrating, and the mechanism doesn't work until we're already somewhat dehydrated, all right? So we feel thirsty, and that makes us have a drink, okay? And so we've got this, I've got to have a drink, I'm so thirsty, right? Or my mouth feels dry, or, okay? And that's a deliberate attempt by the brain to make you have a drink. It's controlled by the hypothalamus, and the brain also receives information from receptors regarding the level of water in the cerebrospinal fluid, for example. The brain can recognize levels of water within the blood that's circulating around the brain. So it's getting lots of information about how hydrated you might be, right? So losing body water increases the level of solute, and that stimulates thirst. The problem is I had to lose the body water first in order to stimulate the thirst mechanism, the desire to drink, which means that when you are thirsty, you are already quite dehydrated, which is problematical for athletes because, especially if you're an endurance athlete, because you don't have very much space of dehydration before we see a significant drop in performance. Okay? That means that we have to be as disciplined about our hydration as we are about our training and hopefully our nutrition, right? I can't wait until I'm thirsty to have a drink. I should be drinking a gulp or two of water every 15 to 20 minutes, whether I feel like I need it or not. That's quite difficult, right? Because if you don't feel like you need it, you almost feel like you're going to gag when you're making yourself drink some. But the point is, when you feel you need it, it's too late. Right? And now you have to rehydrate to get back to normal levels. Right? So when I'm thirsty and I take a drink, eventually it will balance out the concentration and I won't feel thirsty anymore. Right? But it takes time. As I said, humans are particularly bad at hydrating appropriately. Okay? Over a 3-hour period, if I drink what I want to drink, I'm likely to only get 60% or so hydrated instead of fully hydrated. How many of you have dogs? Most of you, right? What happens when you run your dog on a hot day and then you put down a bowl of water?
Kill it.
They kill it, right? Dogs are really, really good at staying hydrated. Humans are not really good at staying hydrated. All right, we should take a lesson from our puppies because they're much better. So you really do have to drink more than you feel like you want. You've got to drink before training, You don't want to go into training and then start feeling thirsty and then have a drink. You need to start training. You want the most payback from your training session, then you need to be fully hydrated for the entire training session. Right?
So would you suggest like drinking like a bottle of water or so before a workout? Then?
Yeah, I wouldn't drink it right before, because then it's going to be sloshing around in your stomach and you won't feel good. But if you can start drinking like an hour and a half, 2 hours before you start training, and maybe have a bottle an hour out, and then just some sips, and then just keep the sips going while you're training.
Do the workout.
Yeah, yeah. As I said, I think the recommendation is something like every 15 to 20 minutes, you should take a glug, regardless of whether you feel like you need it. You should just do it. It's just got to become part of the habit of training, right? It's also important, and I think that collegiate level coaches are getting better at this, because we have had some really awful preventable deaths, particularly in football, in the southeast, when they come back from summer and they're doing pre-season training, and it's 99% humidity and 98 degrees, and they're out there with all that gear on. Several football players have died under those circumstances. So I think that college coaches generally are getting better about this, but also PE teachers need to. If your student says they need a drink, you can't say, no, you can't have a drink, we're in the middle of a set. There's got to be water available, freely available, whenever it's wanted in the gym. That's why I get a little bit twitchy about the playground, if those of you that were out there last, right? There's no water fountain on the playground. Now they've started letting the children bring a water bottle out with them, so that the kids can just go and have a drink whenever they want. But they should just have a fountain out there. It would make life so much easier, because one parent forgets to send the water bottle. And then there's hysterics because there's one person in the class without, just have a fountain. It's insane. Okay. All right. So I have a request. You may or may not have realized that this is Student Evaluation Week. And so I would like you very much to be thoughtful about these evals. I want you to consider the evaluation as the opportunity for you to help the class become stronger. All right? So if you have ideas of things that I could do better, please put down comments. If you have things that you really enjoyed that I could develop further, please write comments. All right? Because what tends to happen is the people who don't like something write comments, and the people who like the class don't write anything because they just go, well, everybody liked the class because it was a fun class, and they don't put anything down. All right? And so I don't get to learn what is working well and what is not working well for you. All right? So the comments can be negative. All right? You can say, Dr. Wall is never available for a one-on-one meeting when I need her. Or you can say something positive. Dr. Wall's always available for me to chat with her when I need help. Right? I'm not telling you what to say. I'm just asking, please say something. Okay? Whatever you say, I need it to be constructive, and I need it to be specific. So do you have everything you need on Blackboard to be successful? Right? So the PowerPoints are up there, study guides are up there. There's a link to old videos so you can review the class again, if you want to. Or are there other things I could load into Blackboard that would help? Right? I just want to improve, always improve, right? And when you just do the numbers, those do not help. That Likert scale, 1 to 5, is useless. And if you write Dr. Wall's crap, it's a little hurtful, but hey, you're entitled to your opinion, but I can't learn from that because you don't tell me why, right? Or if you go, I love Dr. Wall, that's very happy making, but I don't know why. What was it I did that worked for you, right? So if you could really be thoughtful when you're doing these evals this semester, I would very much appreciate it because, you know, we've got a new boss, we've got a new setup for HPE, things are changing, and if I need to be tweaking something, I need feedback on that, okay? Thank you. I appreciate it.